It is past. Good evening and welcome to this additional meeting of the Licensing and General Purposes Committee. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phones or electronic devices on silent if they have one near them, and those present in the room should face forward, speak directly into their microphones, and not place papers or electronic devices between themselves and the microphones. We should all be able to say this in unison by now, I'm sure. Please would remote participants mute microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and save bandwidth to prevent loss of connection. Members of the Council joining us remotely should leave cameras on. Officers leave cameras on only for the agenda item you are speaking to. After each item has been presented, I will invite members present in the room to ask questions first. Then those members joining us remotely will be invited to speak, and they should indicate their wish to do so by using the Raise Your Hand facility. Only those members of Licensing and General Purposes Committee present in the room will be making the decisions, and I will confirm the result verbally for the benefit of those watching the webcast. The first item on the agenda is the minutes to be signed, and we have two lots of minutes to be signed. So the first one, can I have confirmation to sign the minutes for May, the 16th of May? Yep, great. We'll sign those. And then can I have confirmation to sign the minutes of April meeting? Great. No objections. Thank you. Fabulous. We have a few apologies and substitutions here today. Apologies from Councillor Brown, and I believe Councillor Kirby-Green is here as substitute. Apologies from Councillor Curtis. Apologies from Councillor Errington and Councillor Byrne is here to substitute. And apologies from the Chair, Councillor Mear and Councillor Gray is here to substitute, which is why I'm sitting here as your Vice Chair. Exciting. Okay, additional agenda items. I believe there are no additional agenda items. One day will be quite exciting if we get an additional agenda items. That's quite fascinating. Any disclosures of interest? Anyone got any disclosures of interest to declare? No. Fabulous. There's no disclosures of interest. So now we move on to item 5, the only item on the agenda, but by no means a small item. And I think before we start, I just want to say that obviously this is quite a tough item. I think all members would agree. And whatever decision we make today, I think all members can agree that we have the utmost respect for staff and the work they do in the council, especially during the pandemic and things where staff members went above and beyond. So whatever we decide today, I think will be with those best interests at heart. Okay, who do I pass to? Maria Benford.
Good evening and thank you, Chair. Tonight's meeting, as you've quite rightly said, is a follow-on from the original Licensing and General Purposes Committee, which was held on the 4th of April this year. The pay award proposal from members at this meeting was for 2.5% or £500, whichever was the greater, to be applied to our current scale points, with the rate decreasing as it was applied to the upper pay scales until the budgeted figure of £110,000 was achieved. This was costed in full and would cost the Council a total of £113,000 per annum. The proposal was sent to Unison for consultation. Unison canvassed all members and it was unanimous that they did not approve of a sliding scale approach. They wanted to see a single rate applied to all scales. They feel this is a fairer approach as everybody deserves the same pay rise. Alternative options are listed at points 4, 5 and 6 on the agenda. Unison have submitted feedback and an alternative proposal, which is included in Appendix 8 for members to read in the report. The national pay offer is currently out for consultation. This is an offer of £1,925 being applied across all pay scales, an increase to allowances of 4.04%, and from the 1st of April 2023, an additional day's annual leave for all to be added to their annual leave entitlement. In paragraph 6, we have included an alternative offer, which enhances the original budgeted pay award of 1% by making a single payment of £500 to all staff, along with the 1% pay award being applied to all pay scales. The conclusion of the report shows costings for all of these proposals for members to discuss and consider. So I shall hand it back to you now.
Thank you very much. Malcolm, Tony, have you got anything you want to add before we begin? No, okay. Yes, so there we are. So those 4 options in item 7 are really, I think, the main brunt of what we're discussing. I mean, my presumption would be probably that the sliding scale option might not be preferable to anybody, although obviously we're going to open up for sort of discussion in a moment. But I think at the time that was possibly what we were looking at, but things have changed since then. And so we really have this decision between the 1% and the single payment of £500, which is probably the closest to the council's budget. And then those other 2 options, the national pay offer and the higher offer that the unions have suggested. Do any councillors wish to speak? Anyone on the committee first? Okay, Councillor Thomas.
Obviously, we all know that the decision we face this evening is an extremely difficult one. I've just finished reading Eddie Izzard's biography, Believe Me, in which he describes what he did before he became a comedian. He used to appear in Covent Garden, and his act consisted of allowing himself to be chained, padlocks attached to him, and he had to get out of that within a single minute. He made it more complex because he had to do this whilst balancing on a unicycle. Now, it strikes me that this is a good description of the dilemma facing the committee tonight. We've got to try to somehow work out some kind of escapology whilst doing a balancing act at the same time. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be an extremely difficult decision. I think it's important to say that if we go for even some of the higher options, what we would decide would amount to a real terms pay cut of between £1,000 equivalent per annum and £2,000 per annum. That's if we go for some of the higher options, and if we go for some of the lower options, it's even more severe than that. And we're also, I'm sure, very aware of the rate of inflation, which is expected to rise to as much as 21% on the RPI by the end of the year. At the same time, we are competing for staff with the private sector. And in the private sector, you may be surprised to know, I was surprised to learn, that between March and May of this year, the average pay for somebody in the private sector increased by 7.2%, a 7.2% increase in just a single quarter of the year. During the same period, public sector pay increased by only 1.2%. Now, if we look at what is being asked for by the unions, it seems to me that this is the minimum that we could actually realistically offer. We're in a situation where the national employers know as well as we do the financial stringency facing local authorities. And if they feel they can't go lower than this, it must be because it feels impossible for them to go lower. At the same time, given the financial pressures which we are all aware of, it's hard to see how we can meet the demands of the union in full, however much we would like to do so out of loyalty to our staff and with our awareness of the economic pressures upon them. Because quite clearly, we're in a situation where it's being forecast that 12 million people will be put into fuel poverty this winter, and our staff could be amongst those 12 million if we don't go for a slightly better offer than the minimum here. So on these grounds, I think we should try to go with the national employers' offer of 1,925 on all NJC pay scales, 1 and above. And although it doesn't say this in our documents, I think it's important to say that included in that is also the idea of an increase from April 2023 of an additional day's entitlement to leave, and also the deletion from April 2023 of pay point 1 on the NGA scale. And one of the reasons why the national employers felt they had to go for this was because the national minimum wage is now catching up very quickly with the lower part of the pay scale. And so the national employers felt they had to maintain some kind of differential between the national living wage and the bottom of the scale. So this would achieve £10.50 an hour as the wages of our employees, which and everybody, wherever they are on the scale, would receive a minimum of 4.04%. And even, you can see, 4.04% is massively below the actual level of inflation which our employers are going to suffer. But on the other hand, the 1925 being proposed is quite close to the 2000, which is one of the two options which the union went for. Lastly, I think we should add to our motion a rider that the Chief Executive should write to our MPs and to the Prime Minister and all ministers concerned with local government, setting out how imperative it is that the government should provide direct funding to councils to enable the pay award to be met. Because we're in a situation where, so far as the teachers are concerned, they're being given 5%, but that's an unfunded pay increase. The National Health Service is getting 5%, but that's an unfunded pay increase. And so it's important to bear that in mind. If we are to pay this kind of money, then we should join in the national employers and their persuasion of the government to fund this, and we as a council must clearly declare that we will do all in our power to persuade the government to fund it as well. So just in conclusion, it is difficult to balance the interests of our workers with the interests of our council taxpayers. But it's important to say the council is not simply a legal entity. The council is not just a body. The council is our workers. Our workers are the council. So when we're thinking about the interests of the people that we are responsible to, we are responsible to our council taxpayers, and our workers are often actually one and the same group of people. So although it isn't a perfect balancing act, we can't do it as well as Eddie Izzard, nevertheless, I think this is the best we can go for.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I think there certainly is an argument to make in that regard. I've got Councillor Timpey and then Councillor Byrne. Whichever is, I don't know which one of you was first. Councillor Timpey?
This question is really for Tony. Based on what you've just proposed, Councillor, that's a funding shortfall of £355,000. And currently that's not in any way covered in any financial strategy that we have. So if we did that, would it mean that we would then have less people? Would we have to get rid of people to give some of the people this money? It's very difficult for me to actually see how we can fund that unless, the government does in fact give us money to do it.
Yeah,
I don't think we can do it.
Mr. Beaton.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points to make before I try and answer the question. The first thing I think it's really important for people to realise, especially around the table tonight, we've not had any commitment from central government or any additional funding commitment from central government. The discussions around the energy crisis and so forth, they're very well documented. My sense is that we've very, very little chance of getting any additional funding from central government. And certainly we're in the throes now of trying to produce a draft budget for next year. And that's one of the assumptions that we'll be making, is that there won't be any additional funding from central government. If anything, they might even cut local authority funding, because if they're going to address the cost of living crisis, then the money will have to be found somewhere. So my sense is that rather than get any extra money, we might actually end up getting less. But I don't know. That's just my feeling, and based on my experience of working in local government for quite a number of years. To answer Councillor Timpey's question, I can't really say that. It'd actually be a decision for members as to what went and what didn't go. But it doesn't really. It's quite clear that if we have a funding gap of £355,000, and that gap is getting bigger because we've also got the cost of living crisis to build on top of that, something has to give, whether that's cutting staff posts or cutting services. Again, that will be something that would have to be discussed with members and decided by members. But I think if you think of the council's budget and the expenditure we have, the biggest cost item we have is staff. So it doesn't really leave us an awful lot of wiggle room. It doesn't leave us many places to turn. So I can't answer the question directly. It wouldn't be right to try and do that. But it doesn't. It's pretty clear that the pressure will have to fall somewhere. Another point I think it is worth making, we're not like a company that makes profits. You've all read the news about energy companies making vast profits. Whether that's a fair or unfair comment, I'm not here to say. But our finances just don't have that flexibility. Most of our income is actually constrained or dictated by central government policy or DLUHC policy. So we've got very little room for manoeuvre, I'm afraid. So anything over and above the funding envelope, which is £110,000, is going to put a pressure on us, and we will have to find it somewhere.
Thank you, Tony. Did you want to respond to that at all, Councillor Timpey, or has that covered your...
Yeah, no, thank you. But that was really, I just wanted to draw that point out because that is the choice, isn't it? Cut services, cut staff, to give a fair pay rise as you're talking about. You know, the reality is that something's got to give. I don't know what the answer is, but maybe we could have some advice from Malcolm or from someone. I'm not really sure.
Have you got anything to say, Malcolm, in that regard?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I think, like Tony said, I mean, I can't sit here tonight and say, if you do this, then the result is this. But if we cannot go over budget, or if we do go over budget, we're going to have to manage it. And it would be very wrong of me to sit here tonight and to say, well, this will be the end result. We will have to look at it, but somewhere along the line, if we put any pressure on the budget over and above what's in there, it will have to be found from somewhere. I mean, and we've spent a lot of time and effort in getting, with some of our regeneration projects that are bringing us in money, which is all helping. But then we need to bear in mind that we are in a position where we still need to reduce our reliance on reserves. So we need to continue with that. It is an incredibly difficult situation. Added to all of that, of course, is the cost of living increases that are going on at the minute, which is actually on top of all of that. So it is a very difficult one, but Tony's quite right. As part of his role, he has to produce a balanced budget each year, and the more pressures there are on that side of it, then we've got to compensate for them in some way.
Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add one more thing, and on the back of what Malcolm's just said, we are, our budget forecast, including the current financial year, already relies on the council taking money out of reserves. So we're already at that situation. We have got we had a plan to get us away from that situation by, I think it was 25/6, something like that. But that plan was set and agreed last year, and at the time we were producing the plan, we didn't know about the war in Ukraine. We certainly had an idea that there'd be a crisis with the fuel bills, but we didn't anticipate that it'd be anything like as bad as it is. So much has happened since we set that plan. It's just got worse since then. And as I say, it is worth bearing in mind that we're already ploughing into reserves to fund an existing budget gap. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. A very bleak situation. Terry, Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chairman. I think whatever we decide tonight, I think it's important to say I'm sure there isn't a councillor either in the room or listening who wouldn't love to be able to give the highest of the options because, our staff deserve it. However, we're not making this decision in isolation. Not regardless, we don't know which way, we don't know who's going to be the Prime Minister. But so far, there are two theories as to how you can relieve personal poverty with either individual handouts or tax cuts or whatever. So when we're just looking at the naked figures of what other industries have done, what other public workers are asking for, and the TUC as a whole have obviously got an integrated programme of something that they're trying to achieve. So this is a very awkward time to be making this decision because there are so many unknowns. Now, the one thing we do know is that if we, as Rother, considering ourselves in isolation, if we go for a higher pay rise, we are going to either lose people or dip into reserves more than we would. All the things that Tony and Malcolm have already warned us about. But as I say, we're not looking at this in isolation, and there will be packages coming down the track to help individuals, hopefully those on the lowest scales, and sadly that means some of our workers as well. I wish they weren't on the lowest scales. So it may be awful to contemplate having to give a pay rise within our budget, but that's not the only rise our people are going to get, but it does ensure the future and stability of the council's budget. So that's certainly the way I would look. And as I say, I think it's just a shame that we're having to do with so many unknowns at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that all 4 options are technically over budget. And so whatever decision we make tonight will have to go to full council anyway. Whether that changes what decision we make or not, I don't know. I've got Councillor Kirby-Green and then Councillor Field.
Thank you. Councillor Burns said a lot of what I was going to say, and also yourself, Councillor Coleman. I mean, even if we went for the bottom one, that's still 85,000 over budget. You know, I've got a private sector background. If you've got a budget, you can't. I mean, I think you've said, you know, it's not that we don't want to give staff an increase, but you can't make up money from nowhere. So you can't possibly give salary increases if there's not the money to do it. And I feel that, you know, if it means that we're going to cut jobs, where are we going to cut jobs? I think everyone's in agreement. We've cut, you know, so much. We haven't got 55 people sitting in enforcement that we can cut. You know, we're working to the bare minimum as it is. So I just wanted to point out there was a reference to private sector pay. You have got to remember, of course, private sector have very different pension setups or schemes to public sector, so it's got to be looked at in the round. If you just look at headline figure, you know, you have to look at the whole employment package. But I think that, so my view would be the bottom option. Even that is going to take us 85,000 over, but it is a gesture to say we have listened, you know, and we are prepared to offer you something. So that would be my thoughts, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's worth saying, I in my chairman's discussions with Malcolm and Tony before this meeting and my briefing, I mean, there were sort of things mentioned that if we were to go for that 1%, things like backdating it to the 1st of April, maybe giving an extra day's leave, looking, I know Wealdon do a working from home allowance that we don't do currently. So things like that, I think, would possibly be achievable without changing the figure too much. If we were to go for that lower offer, maybe just to sort of show our staff that at least we're trying to, you know, help them as much as we can. I think Malcolm wants to make a point on that as well.
Thank you, Chair. Just for members' benefit, backdating it to the 1st of April, most authorities do their pay rise from the 1st of April. We have considered going to the 1st of April, so it could be an option for members to backdate it to that date, which would at least give staff a little bit more. An extra day's leave, really, it does cost us in terms of productivity, but it's on the margins of that. I think, interestingly, that the working from home option may become less attractive as the winter goes on, and people think, well, actually, I'd rather be in the office where at least the offices are being heated. So one of the discussions I've had with Maria is that we need to have discussions with staff what our workspace actually looks like as we move forward, given the pressures that are on us. But I would just remind members that we're seeing huge inflationary pressures on our own budgets already. Our utility bills have risen significantly, as you just need to pick up a newspaper or look at any news website to see the shocking impact of that on businesses. Obviously, some of our contracts are set on inflationary points at a time in the year. And if that's one of the big contracts and it happens to hit one of the big figures, that's a well into 6-figure sum that we would have. I actually, it's not for me to agree or disagree with Councillor Thomas on the matter. I mean, but I think we do need to make representations at the highest level and through the local government association and through anybody who will actually, well, whether they listen or not, but we think is relevant about the need to properly fund our services if we want to move forward. Cutting staff, I have to say, is not something that is appealing to me. We've lost a lot of staff over the years. I think for those who are in any doubt, the fat has long gone. In fact, a lot of the meat is already, is starting to go, if I may continue with a probably unsavoury analysis. But we are down to the bone at times. And I do have concerns. Another option, if I may, Chair, is that we take this away afterwards once members have agreed the settlement, and there will no doubt be ongoing discussions with Unison staff side on what we can do. But sadly, we are incredibly limited with all the pressures on our budget, and it isn't getting, as Tony said, we had a medium-term financial plan that to say it's been blown out of the water is possibly a little bit too strong, but it's certainly taken a severe hit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Field.
Thank you. Firstly, I'm sorry I was late, and your presence in that chair explains why Councillor Mear wasn't picking up his phone. So I'm sorry. Yes, I mean, I think this is, as always, a very difficult decision to make. But I also think that this year has left us all, as an organisation and business in the private and the public sector and as individuals, reeling. Because I don't think any of us, if we'd really thought about it, would have expected pressures on domestic and commercial budgets such as we are experiencing. And I think because we budget before we get to this position, we are not in a position to really accommodate the awful things that are happening right now. But I think we can be sure that it won't be any better next year. So I do think that we need to be giving really serious thought now to how we fund next year's pay award, because it certainly won't be any claims for less pay, and I certainly believe that our staff do deserve more pay than we are able to offer them now. So those plans need making now, because the situation at Shop Now, we'll know next year what it's going to be like. Thank you.
I think that's a really good point. If we're looking to do something bigger next year, we need to start incorporating that into the budget as early on as possible, so that we don't have like we have now, where every option is over budget. I've got Councillor Byrne and then Councillor Timpey.
Thank you, Chair. Really, Malcolm actually said what I was going to say, which is just to re-emphasise the importance of lobbying national government, because the way local government is funded at the moment is just, it's not tenable. We're consistently getting statutory services or statutory requirements piled on us, and no more funding, and that just cannot go on. So, and we don't want to cut services. So from a Rother point of view, of course we want to provide the maximum service we possibly can. And if we can't see a way forward, Tony has already said that it's unlikely we will get funding. Well, I must admit, with a new Prime Minister coming in, who knows? But certainly the LGA and ourselves and everybody has got to really lobby central government to say, please, please, can you sort out local government finance and give us some sort of settlement that makes sense in terms of the services you expect us to provide.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Timpey, and then I think Councillor Thomas wants to speak again. Hazel.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just go back to the point you were telling us about backdating to April? Does that mean then that so they backdate to April and then we will start next year with a pay award in April?
Malcolm?
Is it for us to recommend that?
Yes, it would mean that we would move our pay scale dates to the 1st of April, or the pay rise date to the 1st of April, and given the time scale for that to happen, we would need to be starting to have discussions with Unison staff side very soon. I would suggest that whatever we do, we need to be having discussions with Unison staff side very soon anyway, because of the impact of issues. And I'm sorry, forgive me if I can't remember if I said this, but the figure that's backdating it to the 1st of April wouldn't increase the figure that's in the report, because we always assume a full year effect, whereas actually in this year it would be slightly less anyway, because it's only a 7 out of 12-month effect that would take effect from the 1st of April. So it doesn't mean any change to that figure. But yes, in short, that would be the situation. We would need to be having those discussions fairly soon so that we could get a report up. And I would suggest we need to be having those discussions very soon anyway, in the context of the budget setting for next year.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas?
So I'd like to say, obviously, what has been said by Malcolm and by Tony is right. There's no getting away from the fact that our budget is strained to the limit. There is no that. That is right. They're quite right about that. But what I think is important is that we are people within an institution. And because we're within an institution, what happens within the institution is very real to us. So when we think about cuts, we are people running the council, as it were. And so we feel a sense of responsibility to make sure those services are maintained. But if you're working for the council, then you have to also make cuts. You have to make cuts in your standard of living. You have to make cuts in what you can give your children. You have to make cuts in your fuel bill. You have to make cuts in your food bill. So, in other words, those matters are just as real. So the pain that we will put upon people is just as real in the world out there as it is within the world of the council and the people whom it serves. It's just as real. And I think we could ask the question, why should our workers be the people bearing the brunt of the pain coming from government policy? Because that is quite simply what is happening. We would be saying to our workers, government policy has put us in an impossible situation, and we want you to bear the brunt of it. So the reason why I'm saying that we should go for the national offer is it spreads the pain. It spreads the pain between the services and the people who work for us. It spreads it. And we won't be by ourselves because it's a national offer. This is the national position. So yes, we will be suffering alongside all other councils. And are we really saying that our council is in a worse financial position than other councils? I think we're saying our financial position, although not good, is not as bad as some other councils. So if other councils say this is the compromise they've got to make, I think it's a compromise we also should make. And I also think if we don't go through it, we will be faced with a strike. We will be faced with a lot of very bad feeling amongst the people who work for the council. We may well have recruitment difficulties, and that wouldn't help the people we want to help either. So I think that's important. But I also think we will be actually, frankly, taking a position, because I think there's a huge number of people in this country saying, enough is enough. The people in the National Health Service are saying, enough is enough. The people in the Education Service are saying, enough is enough. And I think we, as a council, should join with the national position, and we also should say, enough is enough.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Thomas. And I think certainly an argument could be made that if the national pay offer is accepted, which it very well could be, and we've given staff less, we could be seen in a negative light there. And of course, as you say, the threat of industrial action, how costly is that to the council? You know, those things do need to be weighed up, I think. Councillor Kirby-Green?
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I've just got to say that it comes back to that we don't have the money. So it's all very well to sit here and say, you know, private sector workers are going to be struggling. You know, I know a lot of people in the private sector who are taking pay cuts at the moment to keep their jobs. So it's not all fun and, you know, it's not all light and roses, you know, in the private sector. Everyone across the country, you, me, we're all going to have an impact on our energy bills. It's not just public sector workers that are going to have the impact. Everyone is. And I don't see how we can say to our taxpayers, many of whom are really making sacrifices, but actually we're going to give our council staff, we're going to go £355,000 over our budget to give, you know, ultimately our council taxpayers fund this council. Yeah, we don't get money from a money tree in the garden. I agree with you about government funding. Government funding is shocking, but we are where we are. You know, I would agree with Malcolm. We need to lobby central government. But unfortunately, we're not getting the money from central government. So the question is, it comes back to what do we, if we do this, what jobs are we going to make redundant? That's the question, isn't it? So are we saying it's better to give people an increase, which takes us £355,000 over our budget, but actually we're going to have to make X amount of people redundant? What about those people? You know, it's all, I mean, what you've said is all sounds lovely. Say we'll give people, you know, but we don't have 355,000. I won't say any more.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak from the committee? Councillor Field?
Yes, I think Councillor Thomas articulated that side of the argument extremely well. But if we don't give them the money, our staff will be damaged. We mustn't forget our staff, our residents as well. If we do make that pay award, something else will give and a whole vast other section of our residents to whom we have a responsibility will suffer. I mean, I know there are likely to be increased charges coming from the waste contract, which is something that we do at arm's length and don't have vast amounts of choice over. And we all want our waste collected and our recycling collected. So it isn't just as simple as what is right for this particular section of our residents, much as I know we all would like to pay them more than is in these papers, actually. But we have to think of the whole, I believe, difficult as it is.
It is very difficult. I mean, even when I was looking at this, I even looked into how much the total member allowance was. And bearing in mind, I pay my rent with my member's allowance, and I don't think I could do this councillor job if I didn't have it. But that's sort of just over 200,000, and I was thinking, well, do we take that off of the £355,000? You know, but it is such a difficult question to ask. If we've got no more members from the committee wanting to speak, I've got Councillor Courtell over in the corner there. Councillor Courtell?
Thank you, Chair. Unison correctly makes the point that while they appreciate the financial pressures on Rother District Council, their staff are also under extreme financial pressure. They make the further point that local government staff have had an average cut in their pay in real terms of 27.5% over the last 12 years since this Conservative government has been in power. That's a pay cut of over a quarter over the past 12 years. And now what we're saying is that we wish to add, we don't wish, but we are proposing to add further cuts in the wages of our staff and therefore further cuts to their standard of living. I feel the 1% plus a one-off payment of £500, which won't be built into the salary base, would be an insult to our hard-working council staff at this difficult time. I think it's only fair that we offer our staff the same increase as other local government staff are being offered nationally. A flat rate of £1,925 plus the 4% increase in allowances and a day's additional annual holiday. If we offer anything less, Rother Council could be perceived as a council not to work for, with consequences on staff retention, staff recruitment and staff motivation. The question, quite rightly, has been raised several times this evening: how are we going to pay for this? And I appreciate that the financial stability programme is perceived as being set in stone, and I've come to the conclusion tonight that possibly the financial stability programme needs adjusting at the margins. In other words, our borrowing may have to increase by a little bit. We wouldn't be having this dilemma if the past administration had not prevented this council from increasing the Rother element of council tax year after year by a modest amount. We'd have been £7 million better off, and we could have offered a reasonable pay rise. But because of this reckless behaviour by the previous administration, we may need to display some flexibility with the current financial stability programme.
Thank you, Councillor Courtell. Is anybody else wishing to speak on this? Councillor Byrne?
Just again to put the situation we're in context. If we take a decision tonight which could result in a loss of jobs, that's not just a loss of local government jobs. It's a loss of service to probably the most disadvantaged in our society, the people who want their benefits accurately calculated and paid on time, the people who want their housing needs assessed, the people who want us to have a buoyant temporary accommodation programme should they be made homeless. all these, it's not just council staff. Our council, as Councillor Thomas was saying, we don't exist in a vacuum. We provide vital services. So if we're looking at taking a course of action which could result in job cuts, it's bad enough for the people who lose their jobs, but it's absolutely horrendous for the people who are relying on Rother District Council to provide vital services, and they are the most vulnerable of our residents.
I think that is certainly an argument. I guess it could also be said that members of staff are included in some of those residents and do use our services as well, especially those who live in Rother. But we do have to look at this holistically. Is there any other councillors who wish to speak, particularly looking at those who haven't spoken yet? Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, I think we've got to remember the whole country. It's not just Rother we're talking about here, it's the whole country. And I've heard inflation rates of 12%, 22%, who knows what's around the corner. And I think, Councillor Byrne talked about packages down the line. I think there's going to have to be a package down the line, actually, because I don't think anybody really knows what's going ahead in the next 12 months. And I'd hate to see redundancies within Rother. I'd like to see the services provided. And I accept, we have a budget, and that's our budget. And maybe back pay to the 1st of April might be a good suggestion, perhaps, from Malcolm. But I think we've got to be realistic here.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Any other councillors wishing to speak? No? Well, in that case, I think there's two main options that have been discussed. I think the sliding scales off the table. The unions don't think that's okay, and I think that was we did that months ago, and things have changed a lot since then. And I'm guessing the highest offer that the unions have asked for is probably not being considered tonight either. Totally. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we've got this choice between this one-off £500 and the 1% that's in paragraph 6, and the £1,925 increase plus the 4.04% allowances in paragraph 5, in line with the national pay offer. With the 1%, obviously, it's nearer to budget. It could be sort of supplemented with some of these additional incentives. That being said, it's well below inflation. It's still a real terms pay cut, and obviously, if the national pay offer is successful, then we could look like a sort of harsh authority in terms of our staff pay, and that might affect sort of employment going forward and whether we can attract new staff. On the other hand, the national pay offer is over budget by £355,000. We'd have to make cuts probably to services or to staff, and it could jeopardise the sort of financial stability. And the words I think in the report were highly concerning, which in local government speak I think is quite a serious term. That being said, it is consistent with the national pay offer that's being proposed. It would be a massive help to staff. It would make home working more viable. We're less likely to see industrial disputes, and it would send a positive message to staff. And certainly from my own perspective, speaking for a moment, with the anti-poverty work that we've been doing on the council, part of me feels like we can't go forward sort of preaching that we're going to try and stop poverty and help people out of hardship if members of our own staff are in those positions. So hopefully whatever we decide tonight, whatever option gains traction, it will be one with as best a deal for staff as we see as possible. Obviously remember that whatever we decide, presuming no one's going to come up with an alternative that's within the budget, although I think Tony's spreadsheets might smile at that one. It will have to go to council, so we're not making the final decision, we are just making a recommendation. I guess there could be an argument for making a higher recommendation with the knowledge that council will have to discuss it anyway. But does anybody have any motions or recommendations that they want to propose? Any proposals? If we don't propose anything, then... Councillor Thomas, do you want to press your microphone and say that, sir?
I'd like to propose the national offer.
So you're proposing the third option in that chart, that's from paragraph 5, the 4.04%?
That's right, that's the national employers offer to the unions as a whole, and it comes a great deal closer to what the unions are asking for than the other alternatives.
Okay, do we have a seconder? A seconder from Councillor Gray. Councillor Timby, have you got something you wanted to say? Sorry.
I just wanted to be clear. Does that include backdating to April? Are we adding that into the motion?
That was part of the offer, the backdating, yes.
Yeah, and so this is for the higher of the two options that we're sort of looking at, the £1,925 plus 4.04% increase in allowances as per paragraph 5. We've had a proposer, we've had a seconder. Can I see hands, all those in favour? Can I vote as chair?
Yes, you can.
I can vote. I'll put hands
That's
forward.
4, 5.
5. All those against? 5. Any abstentions? Right, so that's 5 and 5. What? It's down to me. This may be the mistake of putting a trade unionist as the chair of a meeting on staff pay, but I'm going to say that motion's carried. That's the end of the meeting. Good luck, full council. Thank you very much, everyone. A meeting.